Hello and welcome to the second part of our walkthrough of the Grim of War. If you haven't yet watched the first part, I would suggest you do so. We're going to pick up where we left off. In the first part, we went through the structure of the track. I kind of broke down how it was composed, and we looked at a couple of the statistics about the file. We talked a lot about the wall of sound theory and how that influenced the particular layering choices that I made in creating this track. And we went over to that some techniques that I utilize in this track to help create dynamic music. And a lot of that has to do with automation. We looked at headroom, or leaving headroom rather, gain staging, and proper mixing. We looked at placing sounds within different parts of the frequency spectrum and how some of those are moved around and such. Today we're going to sort of segue off of that into a discussion about some of the effects that I use and how I use effects throughout this track. And when I say effects, I'm referring to anything that really isn't melodic in any way or pattern based. I'm talking about stuff like this, these audio files here, atmospheric sounds that help to bolster the soundscape of this piece. We're also going to talk a little bit about the orchestral arrangement because we didn't really touch on that in the first part. And then from that, we're going to have just a brief outline of melodic scales and how they're subtly switched throughout the track. Because if you listen, the astute among you may notice that even though the track is written in D minor, there are instances where we stray from that. And so we're going to explore those a little bit and the reasons for doing so. So without any further ado, we're actually going to start right here at the very beginning of the piece with this sound. This sound is the almost growl-like effect that starts us off, that really kicks the Grim of War off and gives you a really foundational idea of what type of piece you're going to listen to. It wastes no time sort of immersing you into this world. And so that's the reason I want to start here. You'll notice there are a lot of audio files here. And when you start the Grim of War, you will notice this immediately. So we're going to break this down a little bit. I'm going to just first start by playing the sound. It's going to be very choppy because take a look at the CPU meter, something else we explored in the first part. It's going a little haywire. So I do apologize in advance. Nothing I can do about it at this point. So I won't play all of it, but just a little bit to give you a sense. So we have a very dark, growly type of ambience going on there. Before we talk a little bit about how that came to be, I'm going to play the sound to you dry and show you what the original thing sounded like. This was actually a recording that I made. So I'm going to play through this real quickly here and just show you what the very original sound sounded like. Okay, so while listening to that, you may presume that I was slightly drunk while recording that. This would actually be somewhat accurate. Using Vocodex, I was able to transform that into something very unrecognizable. what I actually showed you there was a clone of the original, and the reason why is because I wanted to preserve the stretching. You'll notice there's a little bit of stretching also that occurs. This is mostly to give the sound a deeper voice. I'll play that. Actually, let me turn this. Oh, it's already off. Okay. So you can just hear it's a little bit deeper there. I don't have a particularly deep voice. Then what I did was I started with an EQ. I got rid of this sort of low-mid band here, this section of the EQ. And let me turn all of this off. And what this helps to do is it sort of allows me to emphasize these middle and high mid sections here, which I've done. Because as you listen to that, you'll notice there were a lot of transients in there, like here in this section. So like if I disable normalize there, it doesn't really do anything because it's pretty much clipping, almost. After that, we add this Vocodex, and this is where a lot of the effects come in here. And this is also what's contributing to this high CPU usage. Notice that I start with a growling carrier tone. There is no carrier here. I simply add this for effect, and I give it a completely, I just threw some random notes on here. This is a C and an F. I mean, there's no particular reason for that. You can't really tell anyway. And then what I did is I did some automation of a couple different things. The modular bandwidth, modular pitch shift, modular unison shift. Everything about this is completely random, and that's the point. This is a very abstract effect. The point of this effect is to be atmospheric. It's not supposed to have any sort of structure. And so I really just kind of went all out and created this random assortment by looking for parameters that would change the character of the sound. Vocodex very much changes the character of the sound. And so I went ahead and automated, sometimes in some areas, so like right here, very rapidly so, elements that would change that. We also get, let's see, we also get this envelope here is the panning. I move the sound really rapidly between the left and the right channels. And then some stereo separation. Starts completely mono, then it's completely stereo, and we just sort of move back and forth. Again, that's just to create movement and a hell of a lot of it. Then we have an interesting clip here. This is Fruity Convolver, the wet level. This is basically the reverb. And I mean, it's this. Or wait, you can't hear it because it's off. Okay, and so this is the sort of environment that I created. You can select like an impulse here if you click this, and you can select just any sort of space that you want to give the sound. And I just picked a random one here because what I was interested in was the wet knob, and I automated this wet knob. And the reason for that is because in my reverberation, you'll notice that in the wet signal, I've given it quite a bit of stereo separation here. And so when I increase this, it adds a lot of stereo information to the sound. So it's a little tricky to explain. Just listen to kind of what it does here. Notice that transition immediately at the beginning. The reverb, or in this case, I guess the convolution, I guess, it accentuates the change in stereo separation. We go from completely mono to completely stereo, just like that, in 2 bars. And I follow that with an increase in the wet level. And so there is sort of a relationship between these 2 parameters. Notice here, for example, when the signal gets dry, again, here, it gets, or not dry, I mean a little bit more mono, when the signal becomes dry, the signal also becomes mono. So I've kind of created this relationship to where I want the reverb to accentuate the stereo and make it sound. It's kind of an illusion, but in the form of sound. It gives it propels this this stereo field in a sense. So let me just show you this section here so you can kind of really see the dramatic differences in this. So again, the choppiness makes it a little bit tricky to pull apart, but hopefully you can sort of see what I'm talking about with the relationship between that. And then let's see here. We also have this, which doesn't really do a whole lot. The purpose of that is, of course, just to give it a little bit more depth. And you can see it gives quite a bit of it here. I have a really high order on this. Flangus, or is it flangus? I honestly don't know how to pronounce that. So that's that. This effect sound is coupled with several more, and one of them is this crowd sound. So let's take a listen to how those pair together. You'll notice this is very stretched. This is to add a little bit more boldness in the lower end here. Notice how I move the fifth band here a little bit. There's a very eerie vibe in this sound, which pairs very well with the sort of dark growling of this sound. So these two effects pair together. Then we also have this war sound, this war effect. So let's do a listen of that by itself. That has a stereo shaper on it as well. So notice there's a lot going on in these lower frequencies, and that's the purpose of this sound. This kind of defines the lower end of the atmosphere, whereas this focuses on the higher end. And so if we play these three together, again, it's going to be a little tricky to listen to. Notice that I've automated the volume and the panning for all three. Already, there's a lot of information in those three effects. And so with these additional effects down here, these again are used to enhance this atmosphere, because these are all fairly dark. Oh, I do want to look at this effect. This is the tremolo. This is very prominent. You can hear this right at the beginning. Let's see if I can figure out where it is. 37, that is this. Again, notice how we accentuate some of these mid bands here. And then we also have, there's another one, this contrabass effect. Also, you hear this immediately. This sounds like this. Very strong. You get a lot of like horror-like vibes from that, I guess, coupled with the other sounds, that is. And then there is this sound. What is this one? This is another atmospheric sound. This one is Very prominent sound. Also focuses on the high, but I do allow some of the low frequencies in as well with this one. So you'll notice there are a lot of different effects here, but they're similar but different. Similar in that they convey the same mood, and they work together to create that mood. That's why when you first immediately start listening to this track, you're immersed within this world immediately. And it's because of the mood conveyed by the different effects working together as one. And if you've not yet listened to the track, again, I would reiterate, go ahead and do so. But if not, I have gone ahead and pulled up the wave file here. And so what I'm going to do is start, and this is whatever, and the reason I'm using this is so that you don't get the choppiness, so that you can hear and really pay attention to these different sounds that we've just kind of gone over. So I'm just going to play a little bit of the very beginning. This is the very start of the track. So there's a lot going on there, and you'll notice some of those sounds were brought in a little bit later. That's what this and this one, and the way that I do this smoothly is I'll typically start by starting with a very low volume, and then I'll increase the volume very quickly, and same with the panning. I like to move the panning back and forth. I also play with the wet and dry levels, also with effects. Again, this has to do with bolstering the atmosphere, the sort of stereo image. That's why I play a lot with the wet and dry levels here quite a bit. And same with volume and panning. These are very common automation sources, automation targets throughout a lot of just instruments in general through this track, but especially the effects. Here you see it again with the contrabass effect. I increase the wet level at the very end here and decrease the volume. And let's see what else in here. These I just work with the volume and the panning. So yeah, that's pretty much entirely how this first section is broken down. It's just effects. And the effects create a scene, if you will. I mentioned in the last video how The Grim of War is basically a short film, but it's told through audio rather than video. Effects allow me to create the scene that I am trying to convey to you, much in the same way that elements like performance and mise-en-scene in video allow you to understand the context or the mood or the theme of what you are watching. It's the same way here. We're going to skip ahead because I want to focus on a separate section now, and that has a very different feel to it. This section here, we're going to look at this section. This section immediately follows the trance buildup, the very long winding buildup here, and this is kind of the crux of that, but it's not. It kind of separates acts 2 and 3, and it segues into what you would think is the ending. The function of this section is to foreshadow, and again we use effects to do so. So I'm going to play it here. It's at 7:13. 7:13. I'm going to play this section, and I want you to kind of listen to it from a very analytical point of view. Focus on the different sounds that are taking place, the sounds that are brought in, and put yourself in the world. Put yourself in the world that you are hearing for a moment as you listen to this. Okay, so there are a lot of parts of that, and feel free to go back and listen to that again. If you want to try and pull it apart a little bit more, but we are going to look at these individual elements a little bit more in depth. And I'm going to sort of, if I can try and remember the order in which I put it together, I think I started with some of these atmospheric pieces here. I want to look at first the pieces that are very fundamental to creating the mood, and then we'll look at the stuff that's supporting that. First, draw your attention to this. This is a piece that you'll notice actually starts here in the middle of the build-up. The reason for that is to make the transition into this, we'll call this the crux. Transitioning from the build-up into the crux of this part, we needed a piece that sort of allowed that transition to soften a bit, so that it wasn't so abrupt. This allows us to do that, and I call it area X. The reason why I call it area X, well, if you find out, you are a genius. This is basically just a single note. Very atmospheric sound. But we automate the volume to bring it up. We also automate the panning to move it back and forth. You notice that we bring in a little bit of this chord here, and now we just got this chord playing, and here's the, I cut out the low end, of course. And this plays in the background of this entire section. And the reason why is to give everything that happens here a backing. There are a lot of sounds here that go in and out. There's this effect starts and then it goes out, and then there's this effect that picks up and goes out. Then you've got this effect that picks up and goes out. And then you've got this effect that picks up and goes out. There's a lot of transitioning there, but you need one, or sometimes, like in this case, there's 2 and even 3 sounds that are steady throughout. You need backing. And that's the purpose of this sound. This adds a backing, a foundation for all these parts. There's some harmonic stuff going on here as well. To show you what this sound looks like, it's really just a jambalaya of different, just different things going on here. And I think it was based off of a preset that I was inspired by, but I'm not sure what. And then I automate this X, this modulation X, which I believe is a filter, if that's right. Yes, it is. This is the filter cutoff. That's what this blue envelope is. This is just moving back and forth on that. And actually, I think you'll be able to hear this if I mute everything else. Let's see if you can hear what that does with the sound. Yeah. So I use the cutoff in this instance to bolster some of the sort of atmospheric effect going on there, to give it a little bit more personality, you could say. So that's there's a lot of sounds like that. And another one is here. This one is, I call it a chainsaw. I have a lot of weird names in here. Or is that the name of the preset? I don't know. No, yeah, Chainsaw Symphony. That's the thing here. You notice an atmospheric sound here in Sakura. It just has this really eerie sound that I think is just beautiful. And so I try and use that here to give a different, where is it out here? Here it is. Oh, here. Notice how I focus a lot on putting some emphasis on this midsection. But there's not really a lot of melodic information in that. It's a very abstract sound. That's why I like it. That's why I put it in here. We've also got this sinus, which is just an ear-piercing sound. I talked about this in the previous video, kind of what the purpose of that is. And that's what all of this yellow and red stuff is. It's basically to add to that really, where is it at? Here it is. Yeah, it's really to put some information in the treble side of things, because there really isn't much. I put a lot of emphasis on the mid-range quite a bit through these sounds, so we needed something to fill that higher space with, and that's what the treble sound does. And you can actually audibly hear that. If you go back and listen to that section again, you'll hear it. And that's why you'll notice I keep the volume very low on that, because again, it's just to add that frequency information. This, what is this? Let's listen. Oh yeah, this is another just abstract piece. The preset I used is depth charge for that, and I automated volume panning, cutoff frequency to move it around. That's it. I wanted to let that preset really speak for itself, because I don't know if I changed anything, honestly I don't remember, but that's the preset that I used for that. So I think that's it for the foundational sounds. And then we've also got, we do have some melodic information here, and this is a little bit significant, so let's take a look after this stops doing what it's doing. This is, let's see if we can, yeah, okay. So this is basically just an arpeggio of just different sort of scales here. And we just kind of go back and forth. You'll notice that there is no, there's no like, it doesn't necessarily match the rhythm of the previous section. It doesn't really have any rhythm to it, and that is also intentional. Because it's supposed to be abstract and atmospheric, it's not supposed to be rhythmic in any way. And so you'll notice I play a little bit with the per note volume here as well. And you can see I've just had some fun playing with different sort of scales there and different note sequences. This and I've got two things layered there. I've got a viola spiccato here, just a spiccato, and then I've taken also a viola short, which is a key switch for this solo viola, and then this is a viola section. That's the difference with these two instruments. And the project has locked up temporarily. It does that a lot because, yes. Also we have this, which is an electronic sound. Pretty basic, but it's there again just I layer it on top of the string here. We have this, which this is a very long section. We talked about this in the previous video, so I'm not going to go over these sounds too much, but we continue them. And again, this is what kind of smoothens that transition from the big build-up section so that it's not too abrupt coming in here, as we carry on through some of these sounds. And a lot of that ARP is coming from the detuned saw. And here I again modulate, or I automate modulation X, modulation Y, volume, band 5 frequency, that gives us some phasing effects, and then let's see, anything else, panning and such. And then we have this is, oh, we already went over that. And then we've got some other things in here. This is a helicopter that we bring in. We bring in the helicopter. I don't remember where I got this sound, honestly. Found it somewhere online. After all of the foundational sounds are in place, we need a couple key elements to create a scene, and so the helicopter arriving is sort of the idea here. After this build-up, now the helicopter has arrived, and we have this explosion here at the beginning. We have actually another explosion. That one's a little bit more forceful. The helicopter comes in, and we're sort of building off into Act 3. That's what I'm talking about, sort of the foretelling aspect of this. Let's see, what is this? Another just abstract sound. And so what you should notice here is that I really just play with different abstract sounds and put them together and see what we get from it. There's not a lot of thought beforehand that goes into this. There is a lot of trial and error, and there's a big difference there. I don't necessarily think about a lot of what I'm doing here, but I do have to play with different sounds to see what really works, because as I mentioned at the start of this, you can use a lot of different sounds, but they have to convey the same mood, or your track, it's not going to be as it's not going to flow as well. So as long as your sounds are carrying and conveying a similar mood and contributing to a soundscape, it's like think about a scene in a movie, for example. You can't have a really sad and depressing scene with bright colors and bright music playing. It doesn't work. It doesn't flow properly. It's the same way here. So I've probably been talking about this long enough, so I do want to move on quickly to some other things. The orchestral section here at the beginning is what I really want to focus on now. I use East-West instruments for a lot of this. I'm going to show you a little bit. Not that. This is kind of the orchestral intro. I want to talk about melodic modes a little bit, and the sort of switching of scales that occur here. Now you may be wondering what in the world I'm talking about. If you listen to the Grim of War again, there is a section here. I'm trying to find it. I really don't know my way around this project file as much as I should. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to show you just a couple of the different instruments that I've layered. There's quite a few here, and then we're going to talk about the switching of modes. Here I have a viola section that is a key switch here. Here I have a piano. That's sort of the dark sort of piano that follows the dream-like sequence here as the orchestral instruments are brought in. And you'll notice here there is a number of effects that create it. If you listen to it again around the 130 mark, there is quite a huge arrangement of atmospheric sounds that carries on here, plus a 2-minute storm that starts here. And there's just a huge array of sounds. I wish I had enough time to go through all this. There's just so much, though. But do give this section an analytical listen the same way that we listen to the other section, because it serves the exact same purpose. This section here from 132 out into really the orchestral stuff starts around 148, or even when the piano's brought in. It serves the same purpose, to transition from one mood to one act to another. And then we start, notice how I slowly introduce the orchestral elements. First, I start with and you notice here, I bring some of this abstract information, the sound, and I very slowly mellow it out. I slowly mute it. There's nothing abrupt about what happens here. That's why I use so many effects. It's to make the transitioning very smooth, so that nothing is really all that abrupt. Notice here, this is where I start to bring in the orchestral stuff. So I start with the first and second violins, and I think that's this, yeah. First violins here, second violins, and then I've got some cello section going on here. And I start those with very low volumes, and I bring them in slowly at the same time that I am fading out these atmospheric sounds from the transitional section. And then I have here, oh, that's what we just looked at. Here I have some breaths. What is this? Oh yeah, when you listen to that whole section, you'll hear that sound pretty prominently. Breaths, And then we've got fading in as well. What is this? This is the big tremolo. This is fading out, actually. Just a tremolo section there, and it just repeats itself. Then we bring in, what is this? Heart attack. That's a sound effect. Another sound effect there. This is the same contrabass sound that we had in the very beginning. Okay. We have the piano, of course, I showed you here. If I start playing this. Yeah, you can hopefully tell why I've refrained from doing a lot of playing in the project file. It's just really hard to listen to. That's why I point to where it is so that you can go listen to it in the actual track. Then we have choirs. I bring in the choirs here. So everything is brought in slowly. And this is what a method I use, a technique to create tension, is I bring in these instruments slowly and build them up very slowly. And you can see also here, I start with, I use a bowed gong here to transition as we bring in the choirs. So you can't really hear it that well. It's at around 240. I start to bring in the choirs here, and I'm doing some automation of the filter. I believe this is a high-pass filter. And then what else do we have? After the choirs come in, I have this Weeping Dragon effect, which is a thing. Just going to wait. The project's locked up yet again. Something I've had to get used to. In East West's Goliath, we have this sound. Really beautiful string sound that I've incorporated into here. And then we have, here we bring in another viola section. And we bring in this chip guitar here, which sounds like something. And then let's see if we can just play that so you can kind of hear what its function is. It kind of adds a little bit of, not 8-bit, but it has a chip tune sort of sound to it. Kind of bolsters the sadness, I think, from the piano a little bit. I think that's it. Oh, and then we have this pizzicatos, violin and viola here, and we have another section. No, that might actually be everything. So yeah, so you can see that the orchestral arrangement is very disorganized. And you may be wondering, well, what about all these instruments here? Those are all for the first section. In Act 1, where things are 120 beats per minute, there's a very, not marching band, but it is kind of a marching band style. That was kind of my inspiration for this first part here. That's where all these instruments come into play. And then, because you'll notice that as we transition from Act 1 to Act 2, using this abstract section that starts at 132, there's a very different type of orchestra that plays here, and that's the one that we just went over. Very different mood than this first part. This part's very happy, very uplifting almost. It steps away from the horror that sort of greeted the Grim of War, transitioned into something that's a little bit upbeat, and then we kill it with this very sad, very dark orchestral intro. And in that, I want to conclude this walkthrough by sharing my reasons for why I do a scale switch here. If I can figure out what I'm doing here, because I don't really know where anything is. Okay, so there is, right at the very end of this orchestral introduction, I do something interesting. This entire track, and I really want to find this before I start explaining it. There's a section I'm looking for. I think it's this. Yes, okay. So this entire track is written in D minor. More specifically, though, the actual scale that's used is a minor harmonic. So if you click this stamp tool in the piano roll, you have it's basically a guide, and it can help you as you compose tracks in a specific scale. So let's say, for example, you wanted to make a blues track. Well, if you wanted to write a blues track in D, if you click this, it kind of tells you what keys or what notes you have to play to stay in that key, right? So with a harmonic minor, let's take a look here. Most of the track is written in this harmonic minor in D. However, right here at the 30th bar, I switch the mode completely. And I don't transpose the track. It's still in D, but instead of being in a harmonic minor, it's now in a Lydian scale. A Lydian scale is a Greek scale. And I'm going to play this, and notice how the mood temporarily changes. At 29 to 30, this bar is written in a minor harmonic. And then from 30 to 31, we shift to a Lydian scale. And then back to 31, we get back to that minor harmonic. So let's listen to this here. So it's a little bit different, and you may initially think that it sounds almost out of tune. But this was actually a very deliberate decision. Everything up until this point was written in the same scale, the same musical mode. And so what I wanted to do was add a little bit of interest to the progression. Something unexpected, something that would, because this is very much a story, I wanted something that had a little bit of, that did a little bit of foretelling, right? And what I think that my interpretation of this, and the reason for this is up to interpretation, because when you listen to it, you may get a very different message from it than I do. When I created it with the idea of setting up excitement a little bit. Up until this point, the intro had been very dark, very eerie. The switch to the Lydian scale brightens things up a little bit, and it kind of tells you that something, there's a light sort of at the end of the tunnel. And that's kind of what you get with this abrupt start into part 2. In the second act of it, the entire tone changes. And that was the sort of inspiration for creating this section. Now, if you're wondering how to do this, there's a very specific way that I was able to create this. Basically, I took this scale, so I did this, okay? And I look for just one note, or sometimes 2 notes that I can change. Because you don't want to transpose the track entirely. When you create a piece, or you create a riff or a solo, or whatever you do, and you want to add interest to it, you want to add something different, get yourself out of the corner, right? Because in a piece this long, it's bound to sound the same, and it kind of does until the very end, unless you switch scales, but you have to do so very keenly. And so my method of doing this is I look for what is one note that I can change. One note that will alter the mood just a little bit without making it sound out of tune. And in this case, if I click D, and this is what the Lydian scale looks like, you'll notice that a lot of the notes in this scale are the same. We have obviously the D note, of course, here, and you can sort of see in the ghost notes here that a lot of these notes are the same as the minor harmonic. We've got the D note still, of course. We have E, we have A, okay, and we have C sharp. The only notes that are not in the minor harmonic for D are B here and G sharp. Those are the 2 notes that I use here. So notice that here I'm only really changing 1 note, or actually I'm changing 2. Instead of G or A, I use G sharp, here, and I use it again here and here, and then I also use B as well. And so that's really all it is. And this carries through every single pattern that occurs here. I don't even remember where it's at this point, but it occurs through every pattern. Every sound adopts this brief change. And so that's the reason that I do this change, is to add a little bit of interest and do a little bit of storytelling with it. And then, of course, we transition to Act 2. And that's about it for the Grim of War. Obviously, there's a lot more to this project, but really, I hope the goal with this walkthrough is to give you a little bit of a sense of some of these techniques that I use, that the Grim of War really utilizes to their fullest, to creating some of these dynamic and atmospheric effects. And maybe there's something from these videos that you can adapt to your own projects. And I would be interested in some feedback as far as how these walkthroughs were structured, what other things that you'd like to see. If there's some other tracks that you would like for me to walk through, I'd be happy to do so. And that's about it. If you have any additional questions, please let me know. This was a very fun, albeit laborious, track to compose, and I do look forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a great day.